Bleh. Blondie and the Ramones, they played shows together. They were part of the same scene. They were contemporaries. There was contention. There was tension between Blondie and Ramones, particularly Johnny Ramone. But, you know, overall, there was a sort of shared affinity. Debbie Harry and Chris Stein were close with Joey Ramone, and Debbie Harry contributed vocals to various Ramone tracks, including Go Little Camaro Go, during Richie's stint in the band. So there's some there's some shared familiarity there. And the thing that's interesting, the thing to remember too about like a band like Blondie versus a band like the Ramones, they sort of deviate at a certain point in time, and maybe at around in the late 70s, where, you know, this is after Sid Vicious has murdered Nancy, right? And the idea of punk as this international household name, which came about as a result of the Pistols. Now, punk is a bad word. It's not a commercial word. You can't make money with punk. And so the record labels are like, there's a lot of potential in this music. We can't call it punk anymore. And again, just because you're a punk band doesn't mean you have a punk sound. And when you think of the punk sound, you're thinking of maybe the Dead Boys, or maybe you're thinking of, you know, the Ramones or whoever. You know, Blondie, Talking Heads, there are all these other bands that were part of that punk movement that did not have that sound. Right. And so those bands with a more palatable, let's call it palatable, sound were more easily embraced by record companies who repackaged these bands as new wave. So that's where the new wave moniker comes from. It's a made up term made up by record labels. Punk, the idea of punk, whether it was Legs McNeil who coined it or whoever, punk is like there's a grassroots sort of energy to it, right? Because there's a grassrootsness to it. I don't know how else to say that, because it came from it was those people figuring out who and what they were, and then like calling themselves that, although they didn't know what punk was when they were doing it initially. The label maybe came a little bit later, right? But it was an organic sort of thing. Whereas with new wave, it's like, hey, what's the best way to sell this music and sell records and get these people on the radio? Call them a new wave band. The Ramones were never going to be a new wave band. They tried to lean into a more new wave style after End of the Century, after Phil Spector. They started working with other producers on Pleasant Dreams and God, what's the other one? Pleasant Dreams and Subterranean Jungle, right? Those are records have they're sort of searching for a sound. They're searching for a sound that might be more palatable for radio. I mean, that's what End of the Century was too, right? They were always hoping for a hit record, and when it never came, eventually they realized when it come. I mean, we want the airwaves. They wanted to be the Ramones wanted to be on the radio, but the Ramones weren't for whatever reason. And honestly, there are people we can ask, and I really, it's a question I should save for my next session with somebody. But I want to know. I don't think it's really been documented. Were the Ramones ever like pitched like, hey, can we, call you guys new wave? Or why wasn't new wave? Maybe it was because they had too much of a hard edge. So no matter how much new wave they made their sound, they were never going to sort of break out. The reason why I bring all this up is because the flip side of this, Elvis Ramone's band, Blondie, they did fit the new wave moniker. And they had big hits. Heart of Glass was a big hit. Dreaming was a hit. The Parallel Lines came out. I mean, Blondie blew up. Blondie blew up. I mean, Heart of Glass is, almost a disco song, right? So they broke out into the mainstream. They broke out of their punk background, and they very easily were able to camouflage themselves as new wave. Now, Did they change their sound at all in the process to do that? That is something I cannot speak to. I do not know. Again, I don't know enough about Blondie. I like Blondie, by the way. I have a very big respect for Blondie. But here's what happens to Blondie. I think it was 82 or 83. Don't quote me on that. Chris Stein, I think there were a few different factors, but one of them was that Chris Stein, who's sort of the I guess he's the brainchild behind. He's the main songwriter behind Blondie. He's the leader, he's the, I guess he's the Johnny Ramone of Blondie, right? On some level, like him and Debbie and Clem or whatever. He gets very sick. He comes down with a debilitating disease that makes him unable to, be a part of the band. So the band dissolves, they disband, they break up. Now, Chris Stein was with Debbie Harry at the time. So Debbie Harry, she started her own solo career, which Chris helped with, but, she took care of him. They lived together and she took care of him, and that sort of dissolved the band. And so Clem Burke is like something like, he's like 25 years old or something. You know what I mean? He's like, he's a young guy and things dissolve.